Jen, I'll be honest, I haven't always been the most enthusiastic of nonfiction readers, but I've since changed my tune after discovering a few key authors, including Mary Roach. I've been hooked on her books ever since I read Packing for Mars. She has this ability to tease out the quirky, unconventional aspects of science and writes with so much humor and wit that complex topics are made accessible to the average person. When I saw that she was coming out with a new book, I knew we had to ask her to be a guest on the first 50 pages.
Mary Roach is the New York Times bestselling author of several books, including Stiff, Spook, Bonk, Gulp, Grunt, and Packing for Mars. Her new book, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, just came out in September.
We are so excited and completely awestruck to have Mary Roach as our guest today. Welcome to the first 50 pages, Mary.
Thank you so much, you guys. Don't be awestruck. Stop that.
So, of course, before we dive into talking about your latest book, Fuzz, as an avid fan, I have to know, what got you hooked on writing about science?
Well, I kind of came to it indirectly. I was a general magazine writer, feature writer for many years. In the beginning, I was writing for just the Sunday magazine of the San Francisco newspaper. But then there was this magazine that started up. It was called Hippocrates, and it dealt with medicine and health, but in a really fun way. Like they would go, well, we want a diet story. And I'd say, how about we do how do sumo wrestlers gain weight? And then you do the opposite. Like I would do whatever I could to get a trip somewhere crazy and far flung, and they would go for it. So I did a lot of writing about health and medicine. And it was very fun. And that went on. I was a contributing editor there for at least a decade. And then Discover magazine, somebody just contacted me, an editor from Discover, which is of course a science magazine for the general public. And the editor contacted me with an assignment, and I said, sure. And it was very fun. I forget exactly what the topic was, but I kept writing for them. And the science stories I was doing and the health and human body related stories were always the most fascinating for me. I mean, I love to travel, but I found that the human body is kind of like a foreign planet, just a very weird place to explore. So it kind of just held my attention.
What would you say is the toughest part about science writing for you? I mean, obviously you have a ton of experience now, but was there a shift that you had to make in your journalism style, or kind of just a shift in your writing?
Well, I think that the challenge for me is that I don't have a background in biology or physiology, or any science for that matter. So when I come up against a fairly complicated subject, say genetics or neuroscience, I have to kind of scramble to get up to speed. And I definitely run the risk of sounding like an idiot when I interview the scientists or the doctors or the surgeons. I think the shift is that I've gotten used to being the idiot. I have no shame. I will ask anything, no matter how basic. And I will also say to somebody, I'm sorry, I didn't understand a word of what you just said. We need to, can we back up? Can you drop this down? Just pretend you're talking to a 8th grader and just try to talk to me that way. Because if I don't understand what someone's saying, I can't make the reader understand. So I have to be a little proactive in trying to get folks to speak on a more basic level so that I can understand it.
What do you think people often get wrong about your books or about science writing in general?
I want people to know, just from glancing at the cover, that this is a fun read, even though it has the word science, may have the word science in the subtitle. So I think people tend to run away from science. They think it's not going to be an interesting read. I mean, I'm like one of you mentioned, not typically reading nonfiction, and I'm someone who reads a lot more fiction than nonfiction. And I also often find nonfiction, while it's fascinating, sometimes it's not something I want to just curl up with and enjoy. It's more like educational and fascinating. But I'm trying to pull people in to a topic they may have some resistance to. So I think that people like Gulp, which is a book that goes from the nose to the rear end, follows the tube, Adventures on the Alimentary Canal. That title was designed. I want people to go like, I wanted it to feel like a travel log, like you're sailing down the Alimentary Canal. Like it's a fun and interesting journey. There's nothing in there about nutrition. It's barely even about digestion. It's a really surprising, weird read, and I try to convey that with the title and the cover. But I think sometimes people don't know. They see the topic and they think, ugh, I don't want to read about space. I don't want to read about. I'm like, no, don't go away. Stop, come back. Well, I promise you, it'll be enjoyable.
I will tell you, as a reader, I thought that the book was so fun to read, and I found myself just wanting to talk about it constantly. I was like, this book I'm reading, let me tell you this story from this book I'm reading, and there would be something on the news that would catch my attention in a different way because of what I read about in the book. And I think people were kind of like, yeah, we know you're reading this book. I'm like, you should read it. Then we can talk about these stories. They're super fun. I would agree. It was really a fun read. It really was.
Well, thank you. And it's people like you who I have to thank for my success, because I really think there isn't any way for a cover and a title to get across what is in that book, because it's pretty unexpected, I think, what goes into my books. And so it's only when somebody starts to read it and talks about it to their friends that they really get an idea or they listen to a podcast like this, that they really get a sense of it. So that's why it's so important. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit, I loved reading it too.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, this is another great Mary Roach book that I'm learning something else about science. I
mean, yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't even mention the liver. I don't have anything. There's nothing fun about the liver. Let's just skip the liver. And meanwhile, I've got 3 chapters on flatus. There's an entire chapter on, remember the one about, can the Eaton ever escape? Starting with Jonah and the whale. And then there's all these rumors about certain worms escaping from the stomach of reptiles. And so I went down this crazy rabbit hole of answering that question, which is so much fun for me. But people they would have no idea from the cover. I can't convey that with a cover that is inside this book. So I guess I could have just a little note that says, with 3 chapters about flatus.
Yeah, kind of have a little asterisk and then just start listing all the stuff. So for our listeners who haven't yet had a chance, like Jen and I, to get their hands on a copy of Fuzz, would you mind sharing a bit on what it's about?
Oh, sure. The subtitle is When Nature Breaks the Law. And it's mostly animals, although there's some trees in there, and beans. So it's, and obviously animals don't break the law. The laws are written for humans, but all of the things that are illegal, from manslaughter, murder, breaking and entering, trespassing, vandalism, jaywalking, animals do all of that. And it drives us crazy sometimes. And so it was kind of a fun way to present the topic of human wildlife conflict, because the term human wildlife conflict sounds really boring. So I wanted to present it in kind of a relatable crime way. So we start with the felony crimes, murder and manslaughter, and I look at the forensics of wildlife attack scenes when an animal kills a person, and the because that is treated like a crime scene. And there's, from everything from the yellow tape to the gathering evidence, DNA, trying to link the victim to the perpetrator. And then talking about breaking and entering, which is a bear chapter set in Colorado, where bears routinely break into houses, sometimes when people are there having dinner. And then moving on to jaywalking has to do with deer in the headlights, and why do they do that, and how can you help them to get out of the road, and so various things relating to jaywalking. Ungulates. I have gulls that were doing some crazy acts of vandalism at the Vatican. I always wanted to go to the Vatican. So It was, so I did. Um, I thought maybe I could also, while I was there, get an audience with the Pope and ask him about the ethics of pest control, but I did not I did not succeed at getting an audience with the Pope. But I did get an interview with somebody at the Pontifical Academy for Life, which was pretty hilarious.
I can't believe they didn't want to add you to the Pope's calendar.
I know. I would have thought it would have been a refreshing change from the usual topics that the Pope has to confront, you know? It's a little tricky to get access there, the old Vatican.
I do love how your book does take you to different places, right? So you talked about being in Colorado and bear attacks, and you're in India and California and in Canada, which I found especially interesting. The WART training, WHART, the Wildlife Human Attack Response Training.
Yes.
So it does take you to all of these different places, and you really do immerse yourself in research with the subject. But I think one of the things that really struck me in the book is the interactions that you had with the people that you're working with. There are people who took you, and kind of showed you, the real life scenarios. You're walking through the mountains of California, in India, having close interactions with macaques. And
yes.
So, and like you said, you're not afraid to kind of poke fun at yourself too. And I think that's part of what makes it so accessible, because as readers, we are not scientists, but we really do get to be involved in the story and the process. Like, you take us on that journey. I just have to share a couple of my favorite quotes. They're not your quotes. They're quotes from other people that you were working with in the book. So one of them is, "It's hard to be tolerant when there is a bear in your kitchen." I was like,
the understatement of the universe. Right? Yes. I know. I love that line.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the other one that really struck me is, "Squirrels in the park are adorable. Squirrels digging in your planters are deplorable." And
yes.
That, when we think about like human wildlife conflict, before I started reading the book, I'm thinking like on this bigger scale, and you do have some of those large scale stories. Mm-hmm. But I think from my as a reader, my own experience, I'm like, I have a personal issue in my life, in my past, with squirrels. So that really...
You and everyone else.
I know, right? But I think that's one of the things about reading the book, that we bring our own stories and experiences and emotions, right? Like, humans have such emotions, and I think you hit on those things in your storytelling, as you're talking with people, as you're out in the field researching, which is really a unique and fun aspect of your book, I thought, because it made me think about myself. And not to throw my husband under the bus, but he currently has an issue with some rabbits in our yard, but I'm going to work on him to practice exclusion, maybe.
Exclusion, Go to that Humane Society of the United States. They've got a really good, it's called What to Do About, and they probably have rabbits in there, and they have good suggestions for ways to resolve these conflicts. You often exclude, keeping the animals out. But to your point, I am discovering all of this along with the reader, basically. I mean, I did it earlier, but the reader is sort of joining me, traveling back in time and joining me as I kind of explore these things. And I'm no expert. I'm learning. It's all new to me. So I'm glad to hear what you said, because that's kind of what I hope to do is present these things in a relatable way and make people feel at ease, because we all have these conflicts, and we all are annoyed by critters that are getting into our attics or eating our fruit off our trees or whatever they're doing. And by the same token, we love them because they're adorable. So there's this, and the problems that, the big problems with, bears and bears and people. When an animal is big enough to harm someone, bears are kind of like just big raccoons. They're just trying to get some food, and for the most part, they don't want anything to do with you. But if you've got food that's accessible, they're going to come into your garage or your house or your cabin or your garbage shed, and then and everybody loves a bear, but not when it tears their kitchen apart, or it tries to get into your tent when you're camping because you've got some food in the tent, and that's really scary. So we all make these mistakes with animals, and we all are trying to figure out what to do that's fair to them and that makes our lives bearable. So it's not an easy matter with any of these animals. You can't sit them down and talk to them, and you can't find them, and you can't reason with them.
Yeah.
So the best you can do is try to prevent these things in the first place. But anyway, yeah, thank you for saying that.
And I think it kind of brings up a question that you pose in your introduction. What is the proper course when nature breaks laws intended for people? I kind of drew a blank on really having any thoughts on how to answer that question. I was like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very easy to judge from the outside. People sometimes they feel very strongly either on one side or the other, either for or against the animal in terms of what should be done. But it's off, until you're in that situation. Like I was talking, there's a bear researcher, Stuart Breck, and we were talking about, there's some people who just feel that no bear under any circumstances should be destroyed, even if it harms a person. And then there are other people who just see a bear walk through their backyard and get the shotgun. So, and he was talking about ranchers and the emotions that they have. He said, even though it's say they have sheep that they're grazing, even though it's a business for them, it's a financial undertaking. There are emotions invested in that. And if you've got an animal during calving season that just gave birth, and you see that a wolf or a cougar grabbed, or even a hawk grabbed that newborn, I mean, there's an emotion there. Sheep are your world and your life. And so for someone to judge them without an understanding of what their life and their culture is tough. That's why I thought these efforts to bring, at coexistence, those carnivore coexistence organizations that try to bring together ranchers and animal activists to sit down and talk, but more importantly, to listen and to try to understand each other's point of view and each other's background and why these things, why they feel the way they do, and to try it's really the only way to approach any kind of compromise or solution, because these matters are emotional when it comes to animals. The animals might not have any emotions for us, the wild animals, but we do for them. So anytime you bring emotion into the situation, it becomes a little harder to see your way to a clear solution.
And also, dealing with government agencies, you're dealing with the bureaucracies that entails. You say that the National Wildlife Research Center has had many incarnations and names over the past 150 years, but always one goal: effective, cost-efficient wildlife damage control. And then in another point, that all U.S. government agencies agree on the fate of a wild animal that kills a human. And, that's how we approach things in the United States. But in other countries, things are, looked at very differently. And I think you explore that in a really interesting way when you do go to India.
Yeah, both here and in Canada, that's the policy. It's treated as a matter of public safety. An animal that harms a person or kills a person is destroyed. There's an effort to make sure that they have captured the actual individual, not the wrong one, but nonetheless, that is the policy. In India, India is interesting because some of the animals that cause the most trouble, elephants and monkeys, those are both represented as deities in Hinduism. You have Hanuman, the monkey god, and Ganesh, the elephant god. And so people are brought up with this lovely relationship to animals and nature because the deities tend to be plants and animals often, or their spouse is one, or they're riding on one. So there's a lot of affection and reverence accorded to the wild animals. If you go to a Hanuman temple in New Delhi or anywhere in the north of India, people go in and they make offerings to the idols inside, but they also come out and make an offering, as it were, to the macaques. There's always macaques around the Hanuman temple because they know that people are handing out fruits and candies and little drink boxes. And so people are doing the very thing that causes the problems. They're attracting these animals in large numbers into urban areas because they feed them. But they are also very annoyed and they want the city to make the problem go away. The city will never be able to do anything like culling, like we do here with deer, where there's sometimes, if the herds get too big, the population is too high, they may hire a sharpshooter and cull the herd. That would never happen with the monkeys in India. It's even difficult to get people to accept any kind of birth control efforts. The monkeys are captured and taken to a sanctuary in the southern part of New Delhi. It's very hard for the veterinary services department to hire a monkey catcher because the job has a stigma. Your job is to trap and harass and manhandle a monkey, and that's not acceptable. So it is this very vexing problem for the bureaucracy in New Delhi, as I figured out when I went there.
Were there specific stories or travels related to animal-human conflict that were most interesting to you in doing your research for this book, or stories that had the most impact, visits that had the most impact on your writing?
Well, not necessarily on the writing, but I did find that the time I spent in New Zealand was very thought-provoking in that New Zealand it's an island nation with a set of fauna, birds and animals that are evolved without land predators. These birds, they're flightless because they didn't need to fly away. They didn't have any predators. And then humans arrived from Europe and wanted to bring along some of their own animals to make it look more like home. They brought rabbits. The rabbits multiplied and became a problem. And so what the solution was, somebody started importing stoats and ferrets from Europe to kill the rabbits. Well, there were some rabbits killed, but the stoats, ferrets kind of looked around and kind of thought, well, those eggs and those little chicks running around, those birds that can't fly, that's pretty tasty. So that the indigenous animals began to be wiped out. So the government has undertaken this program, Predator Free 2050, and it is an effort to exterminate from the island ferrets, rats, and possums, which are the three species that are causing the most deaths in the local populations of birds and reptiles. And that's an interesting and difficult undertaking in that, when I first arrived, I went out to this beach in Otago where they have these yellow-eyed penguins, which are just beautiful. They have this kind of like Flash Gordon kind of like yellow streak coming back from their eyes, and their legs are pink, and it's just adorable. And seeing them, I thought, yeah, I can understand. You want to preserve this incredible biodiversity that exists nowhere else in the world. And these, there's a few thousand of these penguins left because of the stoats and ferrets, and also feral cats, which is another whole matter. But so I could understand that. But then the next day I was out at a facility where there's an individual who's testing what he does is try to come up with more humane traps and more humane poisons for these animals that they're trying to wipe out. And that's just seeing those possums, and New Zealand possums, I have to say they're very cute compared to ours. Just way cuter. And you see these guys and like, oh, okay, this guy's testing a more humane poison. You're like, oh God, you really feel for these creatures. I mean, it's not their fault. The possums were brought in to establish a fur trade, and they're being exterminated. And while I certainly understand the desire of the population of New Zealand to preserve their wildlife, their unique wildlife, it's just, that's just a lot of death to be, and also it's a poison that they're dropping into the forest, and there's other animals that are killed. It gets into the environment. But anyway, that was, just to try to think your way through, like, what is the best thing to do here? And then from there, I moved to gene drives, which is a kind of a very futuristic form of birth control where the female would only give birth to males. And so that's going to be the end point of that population. And that's, you don't have to kill anybody, but that's kind of a scary thing to think about too. That's the end of the last quarter of the book has to do with those larger questions. So while there's a lot of fun in the book and a lot of, there's a lot of interesting characters and situations, the issues are kind of big and hard to imagine what's the right thing to do.
And I think one of the things that is very powerful about your storytelling in the book is you present the stories in a way that it does, I think, get people to want to talk about it, to want to understand, to maybe learn more. Like, it certainly opened my eyes to things that I really hadn't thought about or wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
You have another really great line in the book that says, when you tell people some of these things, you make the alternative a little less comfortable for them. You keep it from being a thing they give no thought to. And I think I am probably forever changed, having read your book, because I certainly will give thought to these things in the future.
Yeah, I think when we call animals pests, it gives us permission to think of them not as fellow creatures with whom we share this earth. I think it gives us permission to just call someone to deal with them, to make them go away without really thinking about, well, what will the exterminator or the wildlife control operator, what are they going to do once they take that animal away? If indeed they trap it and take it away. Sometimes they may just, kill it on sight. Why, because we as a culture have just decided certain animals are pests and it's okay to just make them go away. And I think that is something I would hope people give a little thought to, because there are alternatives. You can try to prevent the problem in the first place. And there's also humane wildlife control operators. And there's information on the Humane Society of the United States has a website with a page that talks about how to select a wildlife control operator, a humane one, and what questions to ask, because sometimes they may use the word humane, but all that means is, well, we kill them with CO2 and that's a quick, painless death. Okay.
And for readers, at the very back of your book, you have a chapter called The Fuzzy Trespasser, Resources for Homeowners. And there are some really great resources there.
Yeah. I think it's just, we have been conditioned to consider, in particular, rodents. And I understand people have issues with rodents, but not all rodents are the same, and not all situations are the same, and not all situations are ones in which you need to call an exterminator. I mean, we have roof rats in our neighborhoods because they like to run around in trees, and they're cute. They're not sewer rats. They're not massing in any numbers. They're not it's not an infestation. It's an occasional little guy who looks exactly like a squirrel, but he has a naked tail. And so what? I've got squirrels in the yard, and I've got the occasional roof rat, and that's fine. I don't want that creature, squirrel or rat, in my attic or in the walls, because I don't want them chewing on the wires and causing a fire, which I looked into, and that does happen, because I was like, does that even happen? Is that just a thing people say? But I called an arson guy, and he's like, yeah, that does happen. So anyway, like glue traps. What? let's not use those anymore, people. That's not nice. There's better ways. There's quicker ways. Just a snap trap is much quicker, particularly some of the newer ones where they make sure that the head goes in at a certain angle so that it's placed for a near instantaneous death rather than, being stuck to a piece of glue for a week or so. So, just a little thought is nice.
You do go back more historically. So, you're showing us things from, and I feel like in a lot of ways, we spend lots of money and energy studying and creating ways to get rid of these conflicts, but they often don't work. Even where there is more of a solution, we don't like the solution. Like maybe it's ugly or disturbing to, like with the effigies or...
Oh, yeah, the effigies, yes.
For those who don't know, effigy is like a dead bird hanging upside down, right? That scares other birds away.
Yeah, particularly effective with vultures.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's used to clear, like a communications tower where vultures may like to roost, and then it for anybody who has to climb that tower and work on it, it's disgusting because it's full of vulture crap. Also, vultures tend to vomit as a defense, so that anybody trying to climb up when there's vultures around is getting a double whammy of vulture crap and vulture vomit. But anyway, just a single vulture hanging upside down, kind of spinning around, they won't roost there, and it's effective for quite some time, which most things that scare birds are not effective for very long. The birds kind of call your bluff and go, yeah, okay, that we don't have to worry about that. That's harmless. That's nothing. But for some reason, the effigy, and you can get them that are only the wings are vulture, the body styrofoam, and you can actually purchase them. But yes, they do creep people out. This is true.
Yeah. So some of those more effective things we don't want to necessarily use.
Yeah. Has writing this book, changed how you feel about adventuring outside, or, maybe made you change your habits or way of thinking after doing such a deep dive into the world of animal, plant, and human conflict?
I think it made me more relaxed in terms of backpacking in California, because I know how rare it is for either a bear or a mountain lion to harm or kill a person. I mean, mountain lion deaths, fatalities in this, a decade will go by in California where nobody is killed, and bears in the whole country kill between 0 and 3 people a year. So it's so uncommon. And now that I understand the circumstances, and I understand, what you should do and not do if you encounter one of these creatures, I just feel a lot safer. Knowledge is power in a way. Just knowing, first of all, that it's extremely unlikely that you're going to be harmed, and second of all, that there's ways to determine, is this a defensive situation? Have you startled the animal and it's feeling threatened by you, versus is this animal stalking you? So your behavior, you would have, there's different things that you would try to do in those scenarios. So, having learned all that makes me feel a lot more confident being out in the wilderness, I think.
So in my notes for this book, I was like, here's what I learned from this book. So I'm going to take a moment to share. The worst thing you can do in any situation where a predator seems bent on attack is to turn and run. That running away triggers the predator-prey response.
And cougars especially, yes. Don't do that.
And don't
do that. Yeah.
So another one of my bullet points. As any criminologist can tell you, prevention is better than punishment. The safest thing for both species really is to keep them apart, and that garbage is a killer. We don't live, where we're at in Iowa, we don't have bears. We don't really have to think about our garbage. And so that was really an interesting part of the book for me to learn about that. We do have deer though, right? So
deer. I covered deer as jaywalkers, but
deer,
Yeah, their numbers, they sometimes do reach a point where a municipality will be kind of pressured into doing something about it.
Yes. So,
That's tough. I mean, while there's birth control, there's like sort of a hormonal shutdown called gonacon. It sort of sends females into menopause, and males into male menopause. But the issue is that you have to do a booster. So you'd have to, and with a free ranging population, that's tough to you can't just give them an appointment card and say, come back in 6 months and we'll give you your second shot. So, it'd be great. There is this one shot deal that they're working on, which would be great if that was something. But then you've also got to get it into the animal. And you can't really shoot from far away. A tranquilizer dart is a big, heavy thing. I mean, not a tranquilizer dart, but like an injection dart, similar to a tranquilizer dart. So, yeah, deer are an issue. And in terms of the number of human lives lost, deer are by far outnumber. I mean, people being killed by not so much hitting a deer, but swerving to avoid a deer, going off the road, hitting a tree. Those interactions with deer kill far more people than anything that a bear or cougar does in this country.
Yes, that's another one of my bullet points. Do not brake excessively or swerve wildly for a small creature, no matter how cute. And do not speed in moose country. I don't know if I'll ever find myself in moose country, but I will never allow anyone I'm driving with to speed in moose country.
No, don't do that. Oh my God. Yeah, those papers about what happens when you hit a moose, because they're so tall, and you hit the legs, the whole big body and head and antlers just cartwheels over hits the windshield and even the roof. And so all these people end up with broken necks, paralyzed because of the way that, the biodynamics, I guess you'd call it, of a deer, a moose or an elk that is hit in the legs, or a camel. A lot of paraplegics who hit camels.
Yeah.
In Saudi, obviously not here. Yeah, not here.
Well, another one of my bullet points: feeding wild animals is the quickest path to conflict. So
yes,
don't feed the wild animals.
Yeah, and that's so hard because people love them and they want to feed them. My next door neighbor, she puts birdseed out on the ground, and so now for the first time, I've lived here 15 years, and since she started doing that, now we see roof rats and pigeons. So I'm like, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing them into the neighborhood.
I don't know that this is necessarily something that I learned from reading your book, but, the stories illustrated sort of hammer home the point that the behavior of humans is harder to manage than the behavior of wild animals.
Yeah, and a lot of what these human-wildlife conflict people do, I mean, in India, they're working more with the people than the animals. I mean, if you got a herd of elephants, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, you can put up fencing, but the elephants figure out very quickly how to get over an electric fence. They figure out that the wood doesn't conduct electricity, so they, with their foot, they'll just press it down. The other elephants will cross over. So your best thing is to work with people and educate them and give them whatever tools you can, because you're not going to convince an elephant or a squirrel for that matter.
And your neighbor's probably going to still put out birdseed, right?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that is not to say that it's easy to change human behavior. It's not. We've talked to her about it, and she nods and goes, "Oh yeah, I understand." Yeah. And keeps putting the birdseed out.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Since Fuzz just came out in September, do you get to take a little break, or are you already working on a different project?
Oh, well, it was supposed to come out in April, and because of COVID, we delayed it. So I've had kind of a slow year. I did some projects, like I did a young readers version of Packing for Mars, which was fun, and something I could do without traveling. And I updated Stiff. There's with an epilogue, a new edition of Stiff that has just come out. But none of that was really full-time work. So I've been really taking it pretty easy, and I'm super eager to get back into a new project.
So if and when you have time to read for pleasure, what kind of story do you seek out?
Well, I'm currently reading Susan Orlean's book on animals for two reasons. One, we're doing an event together, also because I'm she's one of my favorite authors of, between fiction and nonfiction. She's definitely one of my favorite nonfiction authors. But so I'm reading her. It's a collection of her writings on animals. Not all wild. A lot of them are domesticated, but she's just a lovely writer. I just read Dave Eggers' The Every, which is I love Dave Eggers' writing. This one's a little different. It's sort of a satire. It's kind of a look at a world in which Google and Amazon merge and what happens. And it's just beautifully imagined, and it's just some of the scenarios that he creates. And so it's one of those books that's sort of a dystopian future, but that you kind of, when you really think about it, we have one foot in it already. So it's funny, but it's also chilling, and it's feels like a really good time to be reading that particular book because of so much stuff going on. Those Facebook glasses that you can take pictures everywhere you go, and I mean there's just a lot of stuff happening in the world of tech and AI that this book kind of makes you imagine what might the end point of that be. So sure. Really an interesting read. So those are two. And then the next book I'm going to read is a collection of pieces by John Mooallem, who's a nonfiction writer. He wrote a book about wildlife called Wild Ones. Anyway, he's a really good writer, nonfiction writer. So those are the nonfiction and fiction ones that I'm reading currently. I love the work of Patrick DeWitt. I read everything by him last year. Wow. He wrote The Sisters Brothers, which is a Western, but I mean, he's just a beautiful writer, but also hilarious. His dialogue is really funny. So I've got a new Jess Walter novel that I'm looking forward to reading. I love his books as well.
We do love it when the authors that we talk with are also readers. It's such a fun.
I steer people to my Goodreads list because there's too many to mention. But and I only do 5-star. My 5-star. Well, there's some 4-star, but if I didn't really like it, I don't put it on Goodreads. So
we will definitely have
a few
to
hundred
check
out. Few hundred books on there that I've really enjoyed. I would say probably 2/3 of them are fiction. Well, but a fair number of nonfiction as well.
It's time for my confession. So Fuzz is the first book that I read that you have written, Mary, but it was not going to be the last book. I enjoyed it so much. Good. I am definitely going to go back and read some of your other books. I've already got them sort of in my queue.
Oh, excellent.
So
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. They're fun.
I loved Fuzz. I thought it was a fantastic read, and I highly recommend it. It has been really a joy to talk with you today, Mary. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the first 50 pages.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, you bet. I just had a great time talking to you guys, and so appreciate your helping me share the word about the book and the topic. It's been really fun.